Hello, lovely people. This video is about the EDUCAS English Literature Paper 2, which has 3 sections. Section A is on one of these stories that you've studied at school. At my school, we do an inspector course. Section B is on another story that you've studied at school. We study A Christmas Carol. Basically, you have prose or drama from after 1914, that's the spectacles, and a piece of 19th century prose writing. So a 19th century novel, we do A Christmas Carol. And then section C is unseen poetry. You will need to turn to the correct page. The page numbers are given, so make sure, please, you don't answer any of the other questions. You're not writing about all of these books, just the one that you've done in years 10 and 11 in your school. At the bottom, it has information for candidates and it tells you how to spend your time. It says spend 45 minutes on section A, spend 45 minutes on section B, and spend about an hour on section C. You might want to jot that down somewhere on the day to help your memory so you don't spend too much time on one of the questions. Let's turn to section A in this paper, which was from 2018. In 2018, the question for an inspector course said this: spend 45 minutes on this question, use the extract on the opposite page and your knowledge of the whole play to answer this question. Write about Mrs. Burling and how she's presented at different points in the play. Refer to the extract and the play as a whole. Show your understanding of characters and events in the play. 5 of this question's marks are for accuracy in spelling, punctuation, and so on. Now, you only have 45 minutes, and it's critical to remember that you're writing about the whole play, not just the extract. Think of the extract as just being there to help you, to help get your thoughts started. It will, of course, be necessary to read the extract carefully, and as you're reading, to think, what is the question about? Always go back to, what is the question about? So the question in 2018 was about Mrs. Burling. So as we're reading, we're looking for evidence of what kind of person she is. The inspector says, was it or was it not your influence? And she replies, stung, yes, it was. I didn't like her manner. She'd impertinently made use of our name, though she pretended afterwards it just happened to be the first she thought of. She had to admit, after I began questioning her, that she had no claim to the name, that she wasn't married, and that the story she told at first about her husband who deserted her was quite false. It didn't take me long to get to the truth, or some of the truth, out of her. Why did she want help? You knew very well why she wanted help. Now, pause there. As you're reading, don't just read it through in a hurry. Even after every sentence, it's worth just pausing and saying to yourself, does that show me something about her? So, for example, Mrs. Burling is offended because when Eva Smith came to her for help, she used the name Mrs. Burling. And that made Mrs. Burling very cross. And one of the things you could argue that shows is that Mrs. Burling is a very proud woman. She's very kind of haughty and arrogant, and she cares a lot about kind of social status. She's very proud to be a Burling because they're a wealthy family, and she was angered by a working class girl daring to use her name. So this is an example of something you could write about. The key thing is you should only write one paragraph about the extract. So when you've gone through and found, a few quotations, you're only going to write one answer about the extract. The rest of your answers should be about the play as a whole. So you will need to take a moment to quickly plan. So if I was doing it, I might say, right, Mrs. Burling, what's she like at the start of the play? Don't start necessarily by looking for quotations. Just think about the story. At the start of the play, what's the first time we see her? They're celebrating Sheila's engagement to Gerald. Can you remember anything she says or how she acts? Now, just popped into my head, I've remembered that at the dinner table she says, "Really, Sheila? The things you girls pick up these days." And that's because Sheila had dared to call her brother Squiffy. Mrs. Burling thinks the word squiffy is too slang and not formal enough. What does this show us about Mrs. Burling? Well, it shows that she cares a lot about social status. So that might be something I might focus on in the beginning. Now, work through the story. The first person to be interviewed is Mr. Burling. How does Mrs. Burling react to the news that her husband had Eva sacked and that contributed to her suicide? Think through the next part of the story. How does Mrs. Burling react? And so on. Obviously, the main part that you'll be writing about is Mrs. Burling's role in Eva's suicide. And then at the end of the story, is she sorry or not? Think about the whole play. And if the extract comes from the beginning of the play, then mention the extract first. If the extract is from the end of the play, then leave that to the end. If the extract is from the middle of the play, then do that in the middle. Write about the whole play, using evidence and answering the question. We don't know what question will come up in your exam. This was just the 2018 one. That's for you to find out. Now remember, you only have 45 minutes. Try and take no longer than 5 or so minutes to plan. It's a good idea to start with an introduction where you summarize your answer to the question. And if you get time at the end, you could do a brief conclusion and try and, weigh up how successfully has Priestley presented Mrs. Burling. What are we meant to learn from Mrs. Burling? What's Priestley trying to teach us? That would be a good thing to really focus on in your conclusion. When you've spent 45 minutes doing that, you will have to move on to section B. Now, section B is almost identical to section A, other than for the fact that it is, of course, on a different text. So we do Christmas Carol. So I'm going to turn to page 18. And this question is very similar. Again, you have 45 minutes. Again, you should use the extract and your knowledge of the whole story to answer the question. Again, just like before, you must read the question carefully and underline the important words. In 2018, this was the question. The characters in A Christmas Carol view Christmas in different ways. Write about some of these views and how Dickens presents them at different points in the novel. Refer to the extract and the novel as a whole, etc. The big difference in this particular one is that in section B, you have to mention context. So what do you know about, say, Charles Dickens' life? What do you know about Victorian London or Victorian Britain? How has this influenced the story? This is very important to remember. You must do this in the Christmas Carol part, or section B part of this exam. Just like before, you're going to take 5 minutes to plan, you're going to read the extract, you're going to find some examples that might help you answer the question. For example, Fred loves Christmas and he's full of Christmas spirit, whereas Scrooge hates it. Bah, said Scrooge, humbug. And remember, you're going to write one paragraph, ideally, about this extract, and your other, perhaps 4 or so paragraphs, you're going to focus on the story as a whole. The final part of the exam is section C. You will need to turn to it. When you've spent an hour and a half on sections A and B, you'll have an hour left. So you'll turn to the unseen poetry section. And you'll be given 2 poems that you've never seen before, unseen poems. It will tell you to spend 20 minutes on the first question and 40 minutes on the second question. Both the poems will be on the same theme. In 2018, the poems Teacher and Change were both about teachers. Question 1 said, write about the poem Teacher by Carol Ann Duffy and its effect on you. You can consider what it's about, how it's organised, the ideas in the poem, their choice of words, phrases, images, and the effects of those images, and how you respond to the poem. Now remember, you'll only have 20 minutes. The first and most important task, once you've underlined the keywords, is to read the poem carefully, and I would suggest reading it twice. Instead of reading it line by line, when you teach me, your hands bless the air, try and read it almost like it's not a poem. Just when you get to a full stop, pause. Read it sentence by sentence. When you teach me, your hands bless the air where chalk dust sparkles. And when you talk, the 6 wives of Henry VIII stand in the room like bridesmaids. Or the Nile, etc., etc. Now, like I said, I would read it twice. Do not be surprised if the first time you read it, you kind of feel like, oh my goodness, I don't understand this poem at all. That's completely normal, at least it is for me. Poetry is like the more you read it and think about it, the clearer it becomes. So read it, think about what you're reading. Remember, it tells you what the poem is about, so do not miss this, okay? You know it's about teachers. And a good trick, I find, when you read it the second time, try and think to yourself, is this being positive about teachers? Is it trying to say teachers are great? Or is it being very negative about teachers? Or is it a bit of both? And I would suggest, as you go through, you need to find at least 5 things to write about. So I would suggest you look for words, phrases, or images that are either very positive about the theme or very negative, and to highlight them. So, for example, in this poem, she says, when you teach me, your hands bless the air where chalk dust sparkles. So these phrases sound very positive, don't they? This teacher, whoever they are, when they teach, it seems like the chalk dust from the chalk they're using to write on the blackboard is sparkling in the air. It almost makes the teacher sound magical. And when you talk, the 6 wives of Henry VIII stand in the room. This seems to suggest that this teacher makes history lessons come alive. So they make lessons come alive. Their lessons are exciting and engaging, and the student can really imagine what they're talking about. So look for 5 or more things. 5, I would say, is a minimum. And if you find it hard, looking for positive or negative things is an easy way into a poem. When you've found 5, you need to write about them. And there's really no rules here. What's the poem saying about teachers? What's the effect of the poem on you? So when she refers to how chalk dust sparkles, it suggests to me, or it makes me think, that this teacher is almost magical, and their teaching creates a magical atmosphere in the classroom. When she says how the 6 wives of Henry VIII seem to stand in the room, it makes me think that Duffy sees the teacher as making lessons come to life. You could talk a little bit about the effect on you. I find this moving because it reminds me of some of my own teachers and their passion and enthusiasm, and how that's helped me to engage with subjects I might not otherwise enjoy. And go through the poem, tracking through in order, packing in as many quotations as you can. Try and mention subject terminology if you can. If it's a metaphor, use the word metaphor and so on. But don't worry about it. Focus on clearly explaining how the writer presents the given theme. Apologies, my lights have just gone off. When you're finished, you'll have 40 minutes left. You'll be asked to compare the first poem to a second one. And for this, you just do exactly the same. Read it twice. Think about the theme. Does this make teachers look good or bad, positive or negative? How does it make teachers look? Find 5 quotations, start writing about them. There's one big difference, though. When you've written about a quotation in question 2, for example, you might have said, in the poem Change by Dave Calder, the teacher is described as stiff-faced. This suggests that Calder sees their teacher as dull and serious and lifeless because it suggests there's no expression in their face. And when you've made a point about this poem, before you move on to a second quotation, add a sentence like this. This is similar, or this is different to the first poem because, and then make a point. So in this poem, the teacher seems serious and expressionless. This is different to the first poem because in the first poem, when she says blah, 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 this suggests that this teacher makes the lessons come alive. And you can literally copy answers from question 1 and reuse them in question 2. You won't be marked down for that. You're allowed to do it. But the key thing is that you must use quotes from both poems. So write about a quote from this poem, compare it to a quote from this poem. And then again, find a second quotation. For example, he was a fussy teacher. That's quite a negative term, suggests he's kind of stressful and anxious, and compare it to a quote from the first poem, and so on and so on. At the end, you might just want to conclude by commenting on which poem for you presents teachers better, which poem captures for you more effectively their message about teaching, and why is one more effective than the other? What is it that's so good about that poem or weaker about the other? Now, finally, just remember the unseen poems in your exam could be about anything. These are examples. These ones won't come up. You can be sure the theme will not be teachers this year. So be ready for anything, but don't panic. Read each poem twice. Focus on the theme. Look for things that are positive or negative, and explain yourself clearly.